Well, hello and welcome to our presentation on the J1 English Proficiency. We're excited to present to you today and thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I want to give a couple of housekeeping items. First, we will be sending out a copy of this PowerPoint presentation following this event. And then second, we'll leave some time at the end if we can for questions if you've got them. So feel free to stick around and do that if you'd like. Now today we're hoping to accomplish two things with this presentation. First, we want to give an industry overview regarding the ways that some of the institutions evaluate the English language proficiency across our campuses. And second, we will be presenting information regarding some surveys that we collected about the way that people are doing that and what they found. Specifically, one that was done in 2017 and another survey conducted earlier this year. So before we proceed, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Sam Brown, and I am the Director for International Student and Scholar Services at Brigham Young University in Utah. And I'm also the Principal Designated School Official and Responsible Officer for our campus.
I'm Virginie Blum with the Immigration Services for Faculty and Scholars at Texas A&M University.
Hey everyone, this is Julie Wilbers, Director of International Services at UT Health in San Antonio.
Hello, my name is David Brandt. I'm the International Scholar Advisor and Responsible Officer at Portland State University.
And I'm Moroni, Flake. I work with English 3.
Excellent. We appreciate all of those who have joined us today. So by way of introduction to this topic, we wanted to start with some of the regulatory foundations for the English language proficiency requirements from the Department of State. As many of you are aware, back in the day with J1 Subpart A, when that came up, this changed a little bit about how we looked at it. And so if we can go to that next slide, Moroni. We're not going to go through all of these different, we're not going to read this entire slide, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things regarding the regulations specifically. So first and foremost, we've been directed by the Department of State that we need to be doing an objective measurement, not a subjective one. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation later today. And then secondly, and this is something that I think we all can see the reasons why, and again, we'll discuss it, but the English proficiency needs to be more than just for them to be able to function in a laboratory or in a classroom setting on our campuses. It needs to be a day-to-day basis for that functionality. And that makes sense, right? As you look at the Fulbright-Hays Act of 1961 and a lot of the reasons why exchange visitors are invited to our country, they need to be able to participate in those cultural exchanges and do things to both enrich their experiences and hopefully ours as well. Now, one of the things that I think is kind of unique with this part of the regulations, a lot of times if you're familiar with some of the other regs, they don't go into details about how you can accomplish some of the regs. And in this case, they did. They specified 3 different ways which you're able to evaluate that English proficiency. So later on in the paragraph there, they mentioned first, you can do it through a recognized English language test, right? Like TOEFL or IELTS or one we'll talk about today. You can also do it through documentation that is signed from the academic institution or an English language school. And then the third one, which became the default for my campus, and I'll talk about that as well, is through a documented interview that's conducted by the sponsor through a variety of different ways. And so again, I think that's kind of unique where they said, here's what you need to do and here are the ways you can do that. Now that's come under some scrutiny and I think it's being talked about more and more by the Department of State. In fact, just recently this last year in 2019, the Department of State came out with some additional guidance where they had mentioned, and if we can go to that next slide, Moroni, that after doing some visits and going out onto campuses and different areas, they noticed that some of the exchange visitors were not having the proficiency that they needed for the functioning on a day-to-day basis. And the part that I thought was interesting in the last sentence in that first paragraph, inadequate English skills may lead to program deficiencies and compromise the health, safety, and welfare of exchange visitors. And again, I don't know about you, but it feels like they're mentioning this a lot more, and not just because of the pandemic that we're currently facing, although certainly that's a very big deal. Even before that, they're looking at ways to make sure that our our exchange visitors have the sufficient English language capacities to be protected, and again, experience the enrichment they can get from those cultural exchanges. So let me tell you a little bit about my campus and our journey that we've gone through over these past years. In 2017, we had a site visit. It was actually the meet and greet from the Department of State. They came out to Utah and they visited our campus and several others. And as we were going through and discussing our program here at BYU, we mentioned that the way that we're conducting English language proficiency was through that third option in the regulations, which is the principal investigator, typically, who's sponsoring the J1, would go through some kind of an interview with that exchange visitor and then give us written documentation saying that they had conducted it and that it was proficient for them to come. Well, one of the things that the visitors from the Department of State said is that if you're having every single different exchange visitor interviewed by a different person on campus, that can be extremely subjective and not the objective facet that they recommended in the regulations. As we continue to discuss that, we actually were very honest with them and told them that we had times on our campus where we're starting to do an orientation for a new exchange visitor, and we can tell that their English language proficiency wasn't really up to the ability that it needed to be. And this part really kind of jarred us. They said, if a scholar arrives without that proficiency, it's the responsibility of the responsible officer to send that scholar home immediately. That was a big deal to us, right? I don't know about you, but I do not want to be the person who tells the faculty across my campus that after spending so much time and money to get a scholar here, we now need to turn them around and send them back home because the English proficiency that they told us was okay really wasn't. And that was a moment for us to say we need to reevaluate how we do this. And we appreciated the process we were able to go through. So here was our process. So again, up until 2017, we were having the department interviews conducted. After that visit from the Department of State, we first looked internally on our campus to see if we could find a way within BYU to take care of this. And it just wasn't going to work within my office. We didn't have the bandwidth to do it with the ISSS folks. And we asked our English language department if they could help us, and they kindly said the same thing. They don't have the bandwidth and ability to do that for our visitors. So we then looked outside. We started looking at those standardized tests, both things like the TOEFL and the IELTS, excuse me. And we'll still accept those. Those are great ways to do it. But we found that given how hard it is for some of the exchange visitors across the world to have access to those tests, and especially in a timely manner, it wasn't the best option for us. So we then started looking at other processes, other testing that we could use. And that's where we landed on English 3, who's a part of this presentation, and we'll be talking more about them and how we work with them. Excuse me. So we ended up choosing English 3 for several reasons. First and foremost, because it was very convenient. And again, we'll go into that convenience here as we continue. The approach that they were taking, we felt was a very good approach, both for us and also for the scholars who were going through the interview process with them. And then third, the cost. While it did add a little bit of cost to the scholars or the departments, it wasn't necessarily the same cost and the burden that it was for some of these other standardized tests. Now, because this question does come up when I talk about what we do on our campus, I'll go ahead and tell you the cost is $99 for those tests. And to be fair, we have had some challenges as we made this transition. We had a lot of pushback from faculty especially, who either felt that we were impugning their integrity and saying that we had to do a more objective measurement than have them do it, or who felt like that was an added cost and burden to the scholars or to the department if they were paying for it, that they didn't feel was necessary. That was some pushback that we received. However, we've seen a lot of successes as well. And as time has gone through and we've made it now part of our normal process, we found that it's questioned far less, and most of the folks who we work with across our campus see the benefit to it and have been pretty good to work with. We also feel that we are far safer with the alignment in the regulations, having a standardized option for these scholars to use and not doing it subjectively across all of our campus. And so we're pleased with the direction it's gone, but it has taken a little while for us to get there.
All right, so I'm going to overview the surveys that Sam introduced, but really quickly, I just want to say that one of my favorite parts of my role right now is the opportunity I have to interact with so many incredible individuals across international education. And that certainly includes those on the panel today. So I just want to express my appreciation to have the opportunity to present with them. So In the most recent survey, we had a large number of institutions that participated, and those that participated were primarily those who are interacting with scholars in the international office. So the scholar advisors, associate or assistant directors, and the directors. And we started off with a question just to get a baseline understanding of their perspective. And so which statement best represents your view of J1 English proficiency? And 97% responded that it's always or at least occasionally crucial to the success of the exchange visit. And this makes sense, as you know, the scholar, we all want the scholar to have a positive experience, and English proficiency is a contributor to helping them have a positive experience. And so we followed up the question with what are the risks of J1s arriving with insufficient English proficiency? And the most common response here is the poor cultural experience. That makes perfect sense as it aligns with the purpose of the J1 program. I'll just highlight that if the scholars consistently arrive with English proficiency, the risks for all of these are significantly diminished. So, you know, more likely to have a great cultural experience, more likely to be successful in the way that they participate in their program, and more likely to understand their rights and responsibilities. The responses to this question were nearly the same in this latest survey compared with the 2017 survey, with two exceptions. We saw a significant increase with those who selected the State Department visit or the early withdrawal of the exchange visit as a risk. And the next two slides may shine a little light on why we saw a little bit of an increase there. So we asked the question, has your institution terminated an exchange visit due to insufficient English proficiency? Now, 8% saying yes is certainly not common. And 10% saying they preferred not to answer. However, that is an increase from 2017 when we had 3% said that they had terminated or withdrawn, I know there's terminology there, or withdrawn the exchange visit due to a lack of English proficiency. And this quote here just shows, and it's just an example of one institution. They said we had a number of scholars arrive with low English proficiency within a short time period, one of which did result in the scholar having to return home. This is why we feel so strongly that independent assessment of English proficiency is so important. And then have English proficiency policies been discussed during a State Department visit within the last 2 years? About half said they had not received a visit from the State Department within the last 2 years, but of those who had received a visit and elected to answer the question, the majority said that English proficiency policies were discussed. This wasn't a surprise. There was an expectation that there'd be more focus on the J program starting in 2018. We saw examples of that with Sam and what he just discussed. So not a huge surprise that there's a little bit more focus from the State Department and a little bit more concern about the potential of having to send the scholar home. So going back to 2015, when the Subpart A requirements were originally updated, and looking at that last option, specifically that interview option, everybody allows academic credentials from an English-speaking institution. As far as I know, every institution allows individuals who are coming from an English-speaking country, or they allow a TOEFL or IELTS, but that last interview option. So in 2015, 93% allowed the department to conduct that interview. In 2017, we saw that start to change, start to be a trend away from that and toward the English language department in the international office meeting those requirements. And then with the most recent survey, that trend accelerated, where now of those who responded, 61% allow the sponsoring department to conduct the interview. And so this is really a kind of a central, this is kind of the central point or the central theme that we can pull from the survey is this trend. And so the natural questions come, why is the trend happening? And where is the dissatisfaction? And what are institutions moving to, and where are they finding solutions that work for them? I will say that this trend is consistent regardless of institution size. It's a little bit more pronounced at larger institutions, those bringing in a few hundred or a few thousand scholars. but it is consistent regardless of size. So we wanted to break down by their current policy what drawbacks institutions see with their current policy. And so I'll just highlight a few things here real briefly. So, and these intuitively make sense. So if the department is conducting interviews, then there's a perception that sometimes PI may not be qualified to evaluate English proficiency, or that it's not best practice, or that there's time required to complete those interviews. With the international office, concerns seemed to be highest with scheduling constraints and the time required to complete the interview. And the same thing with the English language department, scheduling constraints and the time required to complete the interview. I will point out right, oops, let me go back. Right here with the last option was none. This process is working well for us. Only 10% of those with the international office conducting the interviews said, hey, we really like this process. It's working well for us. Virginie will actually talk specifically about the international office conducting the interviews because that's what they did for a while. She conducted maybe 300 herself. So she can talk specifically to that. So then asked the question, what is your perspective of the current policy? And we segmented it by their current policy. And so this is the percent of those that responded that they were satisfied with the current policy. So for example, 47% said they were satisfied with the sponsoring department conducting the interviews. Those who have the English language department or some other similar party on campus conducting interviews or completing assessments, 68% of those said that they were satisfied. This is one of the more interesting takeaways from the survey. And it's essentially saying, it's segmenting those who responded that they were satisfied with the current process by their role in the international office. So for example, the scholar advisor, 38% of scholar advisors said they're satisfied with the current process, while 68% of directors said they're satisfied with the current process. And there may be a few drivers here, a few reasons why, but the thing that makes most sense to me is that the scholar advisors are those that are interacting most with the incoming exchange visitors, particularly during orientation, and they're most likely to experience challenges related to English proficiency. Just a few more slides here. So what elements of your J1 English interview process would you like to improve? Most common response was increased consistency, followed by improve the J1 applicant experience. I really appreciate seeing such a focus on the applicant experience. It's something that we focused on as well, and it's something that we've conducted about 2,000 surveys with incoming exchange visitors over the last few years, and in those we've really tried to understand what's important to them in the process. How do you balance convenience with cost, with a clear linear process through pre-arrival, the pre-arrival checklist, and so we've gotten a good understanding. That's information for another webinar, another time. But I did appreciate seeing such a focus on the J1 applicant experience. And then lastly, taking all that information from the surveys, but also conversations with many universities, wanted to synthesize that into just a few bullet points as to what are characteristics of a good solution. So a good solution would be objective, be consistent, be compliant, but it would also reduce the burden on the international office and the sponsoring department while improving the J1 applicant experience. It would also be easy to implement and convenient to use. And with that, I will switch it over to Virginie. Oh, Virginie, are you on mute?
I was. Sorry.
Right,
So I want to talk about the process at Texas A&M University. For those of you who deal with the trainee intern and student intern categories, you remember that the English language proficiency was a regulatory requirement for those categories. And in 2015, it just became a program-wide standard for determining the English proficiency of the applicant. So between 2015 and 2016, we, just like pretty much everyone here, accepted memos from PIs, from departments that they had verified that the applicant possessed adequate English language skills. And it became a problem over a few months just because we saw inconsistent results. So the PI would say, yes, that person has sufficient English language proficiency, and then when the visitor will come and check in with us, we will see something else. So in 2016, we decided to conduct the interviews ourselves. We prepared a bank of questions. We had also a score rubric, and we asked our ELI at that time to review those questions, the rubric for us. We conducted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Zoom meetings, about more than 350 for 1 year. I'm going to highlight the pros of doing that. And I was the only one conducting the interviews. The pros of conducting yourself an interview is that you get to meet the person, you get to interact with them, you start, establishing a relationship with them, and you can answer any questions they have, in real time. So the cons were like, it became quickly overwhelming. You have to adapt and accommodate with the time change. So, you would conduct interviews at 5, 6, 7 in the morning, and then after work, and that was not the solution for us after 1 year. So in 2017, we started thinking of a better solution where we could, do an interview that was objective, and that will still allow us to still verify that the applicant, had sufficient English language skills. So we did a search of potential vendors in 2017, and you have to know that during that time, there were not that many. We decided to partner with English 3 because of their experience with ESL, because of the cost, because of the delivery of the outcome. And we've been with English 3 since 2017. We have conducted about 600 interviews. The cons of the English 3 interview that we have heard from our applicants is the cost, but we wanted a solution that would work not only for our office, but also for our faculty, for our department administrators who were going to assist our visitors when they arrive on campus, and also for our exchange visitors. So it's really important for us that they have the communication skills to converse in English, in their community, that they're able to comprehend, their rights, their responsibilities, that they know how to ask for assistance when they need it. And that's really important when they bring in their families, because, we have visitors who bring their wife and their children. The children go to school, you have to go, register them at school. So we just want to make sure that we have a measurement tool that is consistent across the board. Texas A&M has a large scholar and student intern population, so we want to make sure that we comply fully with the State Department regulations. So I want to end with some quick info about our English 3 interview. It consists of 15 questions, and they rotate. There are 5 that are being asked at every interview, and then the interview ends with 3 exercises: reading a text, describing a picture, and then repeating sentences. And that allows us to, kind of verify if the person can comprehend and can use, the vocabulary and things like that. The cost is around $80. And as I said, we had some pushback at the beginning for faculty, but I think now, after 3 years, everybody's, is happy with what we're doing.
Hi, everybody. I'm with the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. We are a part of the UT system, and we're an academic healthcare institution. So we had been experiencing difficulties for a while with faculty interviews, and the interviews that were being done, or the transcripts that we were provided as a result of those interviews, were not really providing us with an accurate portrayal of the EV's proficiency. So for example, some faculty sponsors and EVs were copying and pasting from Wikipedia word for word, so we could tell that a live interview wasn't being done. In some interviews, for example, they had impeccable English according to the transcript provided, and then they'd show up and we had to communicate using tools like Google Translate. We had one exchange visitor who ended up in the emergency room with heart problems and could not communicate. So if we were being honest with ourselves, we weren't meeting the J1 requirements. We finally got to a point where we were ready to tackle it. I had met with a couple of postdocs. I'd done check-ins with them. They'd been in the US for 5 years and I could barely communicate with them. So there were indications that English was not improving over time. And if departments had been supportive and encouraging of improving English, we wouldn't have been as concerned. So this is not in line with the objectives of the exchange visitor program. So all the other panelists have touched on this, but I think it's important to emphasize that the understanding of the purpose of the visa is essential. This is not an employment visa. The main purpose is to further cross-cultural understanding. And if you've worked with the Department of State, you know that they will reiterate this over and over again. So unlike Virginie, we did not try to do interviews ourselves at 5 in the morning. Instead, we met with English 3, a couple other providers, but we really liked the platform. We put together a PowerPoint using examples and data, a lot of the survey results from English 3, to develop a compelling case and obtain buy-in from leadership in advance. I thought that was really important. We received immediate buy-in from my direct supervisor, who's the Vice President of Academic Faculty and Student Affairs. And she insisted and agreed with us that we wanted a minimum score of 3 from English 3, which David will go a little bit more into detail about what the scores mean. But we presented at a Dean's Council meeting. And when we presented at the Dean's Council meeting, we received unanimous buy-in and approval from all 5 deans. The Dean of the School of Medicine even commented that he was very happy with this, and he had had a negative experience at another institution when he was serving as a principal investigator, when he felt like the international office did not enforce English language proficiency requirements. So we had this blessing from all the deans, all the leadership. We sent a detailed announcement to our constituents, justifying the change, providing detailed guidance, and then approximately a 45-day notice to comply. So at the same time that we were rolling out our policy, our postdoc office published the first postdoc policy at our institution. And this resulted in some draconian changes for postdocs. But this postdoc policy is unique in that it requires English language proficiency demonstration for all postdocs who are not US permanent residents or citizens, not just those in J1 status. And they did this due to the concerns that they had about postdocs. For example, their potential for exploitation, their inability to move forward in their careers without successful English language skills. At the same time that this was happening, our institution formed a committee to review intellectual property protection issues. So those of you who are familiar with intellectual property protection discussions on your campuses, this added to the disclosure requirements and the complexities related to conflict of interest, conflict of commitment within the research labs. So we think that the timing of these new requirements, this draconian postdoc policy, these intellectual property protection discussions and new disclosure requirements, we think ultimately they were beneficial to the acceptance of our own policy. And I think it was because the PIs were already in a place where they were pushing back. So by PIs, I mean principal investigators that run the labs, but also the faculty sponsors of these J1s. They're in a place where they're pushing back, but they were braced for change and they were facing so many other realities. So initially we didn't receive any pushback to our policy. But over time, we started to see more pushback from our faculty sponsors. And their main concern was about their ability to recruit researchers. The researchers, according to them, were going elsewhere, supposedly to universities with more lenient ELP policies. Now, we haven't seen a drop in our numbers, so we can't, we don't have any evidence to prove that, but this is what our faculty sponsors were concerned about. They often quoted Ivy League universities saying that they didn't have this policy, so why didn't you have this policy? For us, just because another university didn't have this policy or had a different policy, that's common, right? But this was not solid justification for overturning our own policy, and we felt it was grounded in the regulations. So because of this, we stood our ground, and we didn't change our policy or make any exceptions. However, one particular principal investigator escalated the issue when one of the J1s didn't get a minimum score or meet any of the other ELP criteria. And this PI escalated it quickly to the dean, who quickly brought it to our president. And this had to do with a new faculty recruit that this PI was trying to bring in, who was moving his lab across the US to our institution. Not only was he bringing several foreign nationals with him who needed non-immigrant visa sponsorship, but he was bringing in approximately $8 million in funding. So one of the transferring J1s could not meet the minimum English 3 score. And this was potentially, according to the faculty sponsor, jeopardizing the recruitment of this entire lab, which was a big recruitment for our institution. So they put tremendous pressure on both myself and my boss. We did go back to the dean and reminded him that he was fully supportive of this policy and had given us his blessing. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's very important to get buy-in from leadership if you do go about changing your policy. We ended up having lunch with the dean, discussing this issue in depth, and we came up with an exception process only if you're coming as a part of an intact lab. So we're expanding as an institution, we're bringing big labs here. So if you're a J1, we can transfer your J1 record if you can't obtain the minimum score or meet any of the other criteria, but you do have to obtain a score of 3.0 within 6 months or your record will be completed. And the dean ultimately ended up standing by our policy, allowing us to develop an exception process and insisting that he would help us enforce it. So this preserved, we think, the integrity of the policy and ultimately providing a release valve for specific situations. So, while this wasn't necessarily an easy journey, at times we feel like it was well worth it and we haven't changed our policy. One of the reasons we feel like it was beneficial is that we have access to recorded videos through English 3, and we hope that we can track the English language proficiency progress over time. That's one of our goals. We also feel confident now in the event that we receive a site visit or an audit by the Department of State. And we believe this policy encourages our exchange visitors to improve their English prior to arrival, if needed, and then again during their stay in the US. And we're providing other resources to support them while they're here. We believe that it will enhance the ED's overall experience and reduce barriers to their success, allowing them to better access resources, maintain their immigration status, and understand the complex regulations surrounding that, and connect with others outside of the lab or within the program itself.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is David Brandt, and I am the International Scholar Advisor and Responsible Officer at Portland State University. And for this part of our presentation, I'm going to focus a little more on the implementation and the practical use of having a third-party interviewer as part of your process on campus. Now, for Portland State University, we have all the same or similar reasons for seeking a third-party interview. We needed an objective measure, consistency, compliance with the regs, ease of use, etc. And I think my colleagues here have presented all of those reasons quite well. But once we kind of realized that this was the direction that we wanted to go in, we then went through and kind of did our research on what are the options for this and vetting each of those different options. We researched the various providers that we were able to find. And I was fortunate in that I was able to get the director of our intensive English language program and a couple of their faculty involved in this process. You know, I regarded them to be much more the knowledgeable professionals in that area, much more so than I. So having their help was really great. They dove into the background of each of the different options, looked at their methodologies, and they even did sample tests or interviews with the different vendors so that they could experience what our students or scholars would be experiencing, and also get a better idea of how these interviews worked and how they were measuring each person's proficiency. So we did that. We also were looking for the ease of use and how well would it integrate into our admissions or scholar application process. And then also just, you know, what was the cost benefit that we had. Now, after we did all of that work, excuse me, we put together all of our information and our recommendations, and that was presented to our provost for a final selection and approval. When we had that, we then took our time to send out announcements and to provide information to all of our departments across campus, and to particularly to the faculty who are the ones that sponsored the most scholars onto our campus, so that we gave them a little time to begin to understand why we were doing this. We definitely got some questions and concerns, but not a great deal of pushback. Definitely, we had some faculty who were concerned that that they actually used those interviews that they were doing as a way to get to know their postdocs and scholars a little bit better. And we encourage them to continue to do that. I think it's still really great. And I tell all of our faculty, you know, please go ahead, do your own interview so that you can establish that relationship and get a better idea of who this person is that you're inviting to come here. But we're removing that English proficiency assessment out of that for you. So once we had our faculty on board with that, then it was also important to provide new instructions and assistance to the scholars so that they would have a clear, concise set of instructions about how that interview option would work. Once we put this in place, we allowed a 30-day transition so that any scholar applications that were in process that may have already done the department interview, we simply allowed those to go through. But then after that transition period, we then said, nope, it has to be the English 3 interview from that point forward. Another key ingredient was integrating it into our scholar request process. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment here too. At Portland State University, we use Synapsis. I know other campuses also use online platforms such as Teradata. And so our scholar request is there in a group of e-forms. And in the past, one of those e-forms was an English proficiency attestation, which we expected the faculty person to, or whoever did the interview, to complete. And now that simply transitioned over to a set of instructions to the scholar to complete the interview at their convenience. So then we simply directed them to the English 3 website, where they have a web page, kind of a landing page there that's available that explains the interview process. It even has some preparatory information where they can do a practice test or a practice interview if they would like to do that. So from there, then they would register to do the interview, and that is tied to the particular campus where they will be going. They schedule, or they can set up that interview when and where they want to do it. So there's, we don't have to worry about different time zones or any of those sorts of things any longer. The interview takes about 25 minutes, and it's a series of pre-recorded questions. It kind of mixes those questions up a bit, but they are progressively a little more complex in the English that they are presenting to the interviewee. So they go through that, the questions, they have a time limit to provide their answer, and then they move on to the next one. Unfortunately, and occasionally there are technical problems that might come up just because of internet connections or blocking software that sometimes comes up in some countries. But English 3 is able to resolve those directly with the scholar so that they are able to successfully complete their interview in as convenient a way as possible. Now, once they have completed the interview, that interview is reviewed and scored. And an email notification is sent out both to our office, the international office, and to the J1 visitor, showing what their score was from that interview. For the international office, they also have a dashboard that they can log into at the English 3 website, where the records of all of the interviews that have been done are available. You are able to retrieve, or on that email, there is a certificate with that score. We upload that certificate into our system as evidence that the interview has been done and that the interviewee has met the requirements for us. Occasionally, there may be some where the scholar might have kind of a so-so score. We can go and view the interview, the video from that, so that we can get a little better sense for ourselves. There has been an occasion where I even made that video available to the faculty sponsor so that they could get a better sense of what that person's interview looked like and why they received the score that they did. Something that is relatively new, at least through the English 3 system, is that they're now integrated into Synapsis and Teradata, so that the scholars, when they're completing their e-forms, within the e-form, it directs them over to the English 3 website, where they then register and complete their interview. Once that is done, it is then automatically sent back into our system. So it takes a step or two out of the process of emails or dashboards. It just comes right back into us. And that's a really nice, convenient thing to have. Now, the scores themselves, this is the score scale that English 3 uses for their program. And as you can see, there's a range from someone who basically has limited to no English proficiency to highly skilled. And then when you have that score and you understand that scale, the next thing that you'll need to do is to create your own policies about what score level you are willing to accept for your institution. I think most of us who use English 3, we go with that 3.0 score as being adequate, or anyone higher than that. But each campus or each institution is going to have their own policy about how they do that. Can you do the next slide, please? Thank you. So you may need to have a very strict policy where you just simply say, hey, it's the minimum score or above. And below that, I'm sorry, we won't be able to accept you into our program. But more likely, you know, as Julie mentioned, sometimes you need to find a way to make exceptions. So you may have that minimum score requirement, but you want to have a well-defined process in place that you can make exceptions. Why would you make an exception? Who's going to review that? And who's going to make the ultimate decision to make that exception? But you may also want to have a little more flexibility in what you will accept. At Portland State University, we do take a little more of a flexible approach towards it. Our minimum score requirement is 3.0 or above, but we do make exceptions, or we may require that the host department or faculty sponsor come up with a support plan for that particular visitor. As an example, our College of the Arts invites a number of visiting scholars a year with varying degrees of English proficiency. And so when they have a lower score, maybe say a 2.5 or even lower, we will ask them to prepare a support plan, whether that means having a translator, someone who's going to escort them around campus, someone available to them in case of any personal emergencies, such as a health issue or so on, that can assist them at any time that they may need it. In other cases, and someone asked a question of, what about providing English coursework? And that is something that we will sometimes allow. If it is a defined part of that support plan, and it's something we know that is going to be done as part of the exchange program. For example, we have some exchange programs with city governments in other countries, where their program actually has them coming to our summer session English language program so that they bring those scores up and then continue with the more academic work through our academic year. So there are ways that you can accommodate those different levels of English, but you just want to be sure that you're documenting it and that it is going to provide the safety and the good welfare for your visitors while they're here, and that you're meeting the intent of the regulations. One thing that I've sometimes am asked is I occasionally get questions from new scholars asking, well, what score do I have to do to pass? They kind of have this pass-fail. And one of the things that I remind them and sponsoring departments is that an interview is an assessment tool. And so you're going to use that tool to meet your needs. You don't necessarily have to stick to just a straight score. So again, there's some flexibility with that as long as you're ready to do it. So here we can see, just gives you a little chart of sort of the score spread. As you can see, a large portion of them are kind of right there in the middle. You can always go back and look at the statistics of people who are taking the interview for your institution and use that to help guide you as you want to perhaps adjust your policies as you go along. Well, let's see. So I think from that point, we're just going to open it up to questions. I think any one of us here can jump in with questions. So if you have a question, there is a Q&A on your screen. You can type in your questions there. There's also the chat feature, but we would ask if you put those into that Q&A, then we can kind of keep a tally on your questions.
And while we watch for some of those to come in, maybe we can just quickly reiterate a few that were answered in the Q&A box itself. So Elizabeth asked, how do faculty and PIs handle rejections? I will say that was an issue for my campus. I'll give you an experience we had this last year where we had an individual who was bringing a couple of scholars to work with him in his lab. And the first scholar got a 2.5 on his test. And so that wasn't the minimum that we require of a 3. And when I visited with this PI about it, he got quite upset and said, you know, well, I believe that this is a biased system where any company can just give close to the score because it'll make them have to take it again and get more money. And he said, I've got another scholar who is going to be taking the test this next week, and he is incredible with his English language. I'll be really curious to see how that one goes. And this next scholar ended up getting a really great score, and he dropped it. So the PI didn't say anything after that. But one of the things that I've noticed is when we have somebody who doesn't pass, we allow them to continue to take it, and they can get help even through English 3 or other venues before they retake it. And we've had some good success with that one as well. So it looks like one of the other questions, we've had this question a couple of times, does the sponsoring institution or the visiting scholar usually cover this charge? Julie, do you want to handle this one?
Sure, yeah, at our institution, we allow the scholar to pay, or if the department wants to pay the cost directly, you know, they can do so, but that's rare. In our experience, the scholar does tend to pay, and I think the departments, you know, prefer it that way, to be honest. Moroni, I know that you have some data because you track some of this, if you want to share.
As far as who pays, yeah, so it's almost always the scholar, right? So institutions, almost every institution has had departments pay. The process there is pretty straightforward. Yeah, we do occasionally have institutions that will buy, say, 100 or 200 interviews in a batch, and then we distribute out codes, and their scholars just register. So that does happen occasionally.
One of the questions, Sam, that came up was whether or not that we allow the scholar to retake the test. And you did say that at BYU, you do allow it. We allow it as well, as many times as they want. So one of the concerns that they'll present with is, you know, they'll say, I was really nervous, or I wasn't sleeping well, and my English is much better than it came across on the interview. And we said, well, take it again. You know, obviously it's better if you allow some time between the next time you take it again, but retaking it, the test encourages them to study their English more seriously. And then of course, you know, if they, you know, spend some time improving their English or just felt like they were nervous, they're able to take it again and get a better score.
Excellent. So another question came in, do sponsors using English 3 or third parties still allow prospective scholars to provide a letter from an academic institution? And do institutions have standards for that letter? For example, the letter has to certify their course was taught in English. That's a great question. I'd be curious for maybe Virginie and David, what do you do at your institutions if they're coming from another place that was in English and may have already established some of that?
So for us, if the applicant is a native English speaker or lives in an English-speaking country, then we will just require an official certification letter from the university that, you know, all the medium of instruction at their institution is English. I mean, we have lots of applicants from India. We do not require any proof of English language proficiency. We had a few conducted interviews, and we know that they passed, you know, without any problems.
At Portland State University, we generally only accept those letters from academic institutions. Sometimes a scholar will want to submit a letter from an English language program, but we really don't have any good way to determine, you know, what, you know, Bob's School of English, what their background is, or, you know, how they're doing that. So we generally only accept letters from academic institutions. In some cases, we may also ask for something to show, go look on their website to see that they publish that English is the language of instruction at that particular institution, if it's not one that we particularly know about. We do check up on those. We don't get that too often, but we do check that just to be sure that that's legitimate.
Thank you. Ours is similar. We would require it to come from an academic institution, and we want it to be official. And we don't get that very often either. We do get quite a few who had taken maybe a TOEFL back when they were a student way back in the day, and we'll still accept that, obviously, if they have a standard test score they can submit. So we did get another question that I think is a really great one from Tabitha. I've experienced many of the non-proficiency issues presented. If we implemented using English 3 only, how do we get past a possible image of being anti-immigrant, especially in this current administrative environment, i.e. another barrier to inviting foreign nationals to the US? I think that's a great question and a good thing to think about, Tabitha. And I'll tell you one of the things that I thought of there is, I think that the more we can do to help the incoming exchange visitor, as well as the PIs, understand the purpose of that J1, understand that it's not necessarily for them to come and get some experience in the laboratory, it's for them to get a cultural exchange, and that's the purpose, and that doing this allows that cultural exchange to be even better and more enriching. I think that could be a way to focus it a little bit off. That may not take away some who still feel like it's a harsh policy or a negative reality, but it's certainly something that might help. Other thoughts from the panelists with that?
So we have gotten, Sam, that response from our faculty sponsors, and we've let them know that this is a regulatory requirement. You know, this is not an employment requirement. We are looking for proficiency. We're not looking for fluency. So just enough for them to be successful and be able to engage with other visitors and honestly be able to protect themselves in the event of an emergency. So just like you, we draw it back to the health and safety of the visitor, which the Department of State will emphasize.
Now, one thing I'll mention in that question about whether you're using English 3 only, there's no reason why you couldn't have several interview options. That's a possibility if you want to do that. I think, though, that for your exchange visitors, it is much easier for them to simply be presenting, well, here's a way to do the interview. Otherwise, then they have to go and check each one out, and what does they do, and, and that kind of thing. So it might just muddy the waters a little bit. But that's certainly possible. You could provide several options to do that interview.
I will say on our campus, we let them submit, like I said, TOEFL and IELTS and others. We tend to get almost everybody wanting to use the cheapest and most convenient option. And what we've seen is that tends to be English 3, but we wouldn't stop them from going anywhere else. So yeah, I think having options is a great idea. So there've been quite a few questions about the English 3 platform. I don't know if you want to quickly, Moroni or Tracy, talk about the retakes and all of that.
Yeah, I'll talk about retakes. So yeah, so with retakes, we used to offer those for free, but I wish we could continue because it does happen occasionally. So there is a fee for the retake, but I will say that when we start working with an institution, we offer a sample size of, I guess, vouchers for the institution on an annual basis. So oftentimes we'll give, say, 10 vouchers for that institution to use at their discretion with their exchange visitors. Those can be exchange visitors with financial need, or those can be high profile exchange visitors, or those doing a retake. And so that supply of vouchers just refreshes every year.
Thank you. So one of the questions that came in as well is about what if there are people on your campus that may be reluctant to use English 3, or they want to see the product? one of the things that I do appreciate is, as was mentioned by David, you can get access to the videos and see exactly the questions that were asked and the responses from the scholars themselves. And I wouldn't have a problem saying, you're welcome to look at this and see kind of what they saw and we saw with it. So that is one option to consider, I guess. Let's see. So here's a question for those schools that make exceptions to their policy. Do you end up following up with the scholar to see if they have made any improvement in their English skills? How do you monitor these exceptions that are made with the EV and or their department? That's a great question. Any thoughts from the panelists on that one?
So here at Texas A&M, what we do is, I just want to say something also, that we are the program sponsor. So while English 3 is administering the interview, we decide if the person is eligible to participate in our program or not. So we have the video, we can review it, and if the person has a score of 2.5, but we think it's a 3, we'll just go ahead and accept that person, in our program. If the applicant is on the borderline, we reach out to the faculty, and the applicant will say, we will allow you to come to our program, especially if it's for a short time, but we will require you to enroll in some English instruction classes that are either offered on campus or off campus, and we make those resources available to the applicant before they get here. And then a few months after they're here, we kind of check on them and say how things are going, how are the classes that you're taking, and we also have a close relationship with one of the English instruction providers off campus.
Great. And we know that it's past that time. We've hit the hour. We're happy to stick around for a few minutes if there are more questions that keep coming in. We also understand if folks need to jump off. So one of the questions that did just come in was about kind of when somebody decides to pay that, how is that processed? And that goes directly, as with everything, at least with English 3, and I would guess it's different for each platform, but it goes directly through the third party. So our office doesn't deal at all with any of the money for English proficiency in any way. We only deal with the financial verification from the department or the home country or the sponsor themselves. Okay, are there any other questions that I either missed or that folks haven't asked that we can still answer?
I see one question there about transfers. And whether we waive the interview or other English requirements on the assumption the previous institution's done it or not. For my institution, we do ask we still ask for some verification of their English proficiency. We will accept either the test score or an interview documentation or something that might have been done for the previous institution. But we still expect to have something in our records so that we know that this person has adequate language skills.
Excellent. And then I know Jody's been asking a question about the cost potentially for an integration with Synapsis or Teradata. Moroni, do you want to hit that one really quickly as well?
Sure. The question was around cost of an integration? Yep. Yeah. There's no cost to the university at any point unless the department decides to pay for the scholar. There's just no cost at all. So there's also no cost for the integration, and there's also no contract involved. We try to make the process as straightforward as possible.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is obviously you do have to build, so our campus uses Synapsis. So while there isn't a cost, you do have to build the infrastructure for the e-forms, but that's, if you're familiar with how you do that in your system already, that doesn't take much time at all and can be done pretty easily.
Sam, one comment there. We work with those who use Synapsis. Some of them may be familiar with International Office Consulting, IOC, and we have an agreement with them that if they work with IOC and IOC does that legwork to build the e-forms, that English 3 would cover the cost there.
Oh, great. Well, excellent. And any last questions from the remaining attendees? Moroni, do you want to add, before you send out the presentation or anything, do you want to add contact information for anyone who needs it?
Contact information, you mean the contact information for the panel?
For English 3, it looks like is somebody asked for your contact information.
Oh yeah, Tracy's going to send out the recording as well as the PowerPoint, and so they can just contact Tracy directly.
And I answered that question just on the chat too, and I'll provide that information. Yep.
The last question that just came in, do you adjust the $99 cost to fit the visitor's currency rate?
Yes.
Excellent. Cool. Let's see. Well, with that, it looks like it's kind of slowing down. Maybe we'll just say, thanks for participating. We're excited to have visited with you today. Whatever you choose to do, you know, we hope that you're able to find success and that the scholars that are coming feel like it's an enriching, good experience as well. So thanks so much, and stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. We hope to see you again in person soon at different places.
Bye-bye.